Their motives and intent were clearly non-religious. One might even consider to be anti-religious. Studying the Baptist Convention, however, it became evident that the systems of checks and balances used in the mainstream churches would have hindered Roy, Dan, and the prophet on their mission. Mainstream churches require accountability, and if one elder noticed another elder hoarding large sums of money, defrauding members, and violating both the law and the Christian codes of conduct, the offending party would be forced to step down. In many Pentecostal assemblies, however, pastors are accountable only to themselves. There is no official system of accountability established in these types of independent churches. This raised many questions about the prophet that I hadn't yet considered. Is this why he denied starting his ministry as a Pentecostal? Did the false impression of accountability increase his credibility? In his life stories, the prophet always presented himself as a Baptist minister whose traumatic life experience in 1937 led him to Pentecostalism. I found other articles in other states with similar arrests for Dan Davis, and it was apparent that the Bethel Rescue Mission was the base for operations. Reverend Dan Davis and women assisting him were soliciting funds throughout the state of Kentucky. In one instance, Dan used the name Bethel Rescue Mission Milk Fund, which I found to be comical. Other articles about Dan were very interesting. I found Dan Davis was also arrested in Newcastle, Kentucky, after which he sued Major W.O. Olray. Somehow, Dan managed to convince Magistrate Tom Young to obtain 2 warrants for arrest. According to Dan Davis, Olray was interfering in the operation of the mission. Dan even had attorney C.R. Turner arrested, claiming intimidation. The circuit judge Thomas Ballantine called the evidence against Olray revolting. Charges against the Major Olray were immediately dropped. The judge said that he believed Dan Davis did not have clean hands. Shockingly, solicitors were paid 50% to collect money for the mission. There was one aspect missing from all the articles that I had found: Roy Davis. It was evident that Dan had moved from Texas to assist Roy in his mission, and I'd assumed that the mission started in Louisville would have been exploited to fund Roy's unknown purpose. Suddenly, I stumbled onto an article describing an accusation of Roy Davis for similar charges in his connection to the mission in 1930. Roy was, in fact, part of Dan Davis's mission. Dan was raising money, and Roy was using it. It read, Roy E. Davis, 40 years old, a preacher at the Holy Bible Mission, 711 East Jefferson Street, was held in $300 bond on a charge of obtaining money under false pretenses when he was arraigned Wednesday at the police court. His case was continued until Friday in order to allow the police time for further investigation. Miss Minnie Burgeon, 616 East Market Street, swore to the warrant. Davis denied the charges. This suddenly reminded me of a strange description of Roy Davis's Pentecostal church that the prophet frequently used. In one particular instance, the prophet used the word mission and then corrected himself to the word missionary. The prophet said that he was ordained by Davis in the missionary Baptist church. When the prophet started preaching with Roy Davis, the mission was to accumulate large sums of money. This was the missionary Baptist church. When I thought about the men with whom the prophet was associating and discovered their illegal and unethical means to finance their operations, I began to wonder how long the prophet had worked with them. It was time to dig deeper into the early ministry of the prophet. How long was he active with Davis and the Davis brothers? How much did they influence his doctrine? Was his evangelistic career another means to provide funding for Davis? Was the Branham Tabernacle just another one of many churches that Roy Davis planted?